Now that we have a handle on the general principles and satirical approach of Jonathan Swift, featured here in Gulliver's Travels, as well as in A Modest Proposal, let's do a close reading of a few select passages that demonstrate these principles at work. First, we'll look at a few passages in Gulliver's Travels, and then turn to A Modest Proposal. Gulliver's Travels, which you see here in the Oxford edition that we have accessible to us through our library, does everything it can to both obscure its own fictionality and mock the very principle, the very idea of fiction. It is a work that is, in some ways, at war or satirizing its very form, which is the point I want us to take away from these studies of Swift. He is read as a father of the novel, and Gulliver's Travels as a canonical early text in it, but he has absolutely no respect for the novel. These frontispieces, I apologize that they're on the side, but offering various engravings and so-called portraits of Gulliver, and as you saw, it is a text that purports to be of him. Here it is actually Swift, as Robinson Crusoe hides its own fictionality. But that machinery of obscuring, of obfuscation, hiding and concealing, comes into play right before the adventures begin in these prefatory materials. An advertisement, meaning a notice from the publisher, and then more importantly, the letter from Gulliver to his cousin Simpson that we're going to look at right now. The publisher or the notice, the printer issues this notice before the text in its later editions that the copy that you have in your hands is the original record of what Gulliver himself wrote down, and that no change has been made. You can see emphasized here how this is an original document, and only any corrections are there. Why is that necessary? Because in this later edition, 1735, after the text was originally published in 1726, the novel first edition in 1726, and then revised in 1735, Swift, under the name of Gulliver, Lemuel Gulliver, appended this letter to his cousin Simpson, who was the so-called, it's all fictional, the intermediary who sent the original manuscript to the printer. And in this letter, Gulliver he excoriates his cousin Simpson for having adulterated, changed his actual account. With under great urgency, only Simpson is the one who urged him to publish it, a loose and incorrect account of my travels, to the extent, and there were things false said about Queen Anne, and actually Swift in his prolific career as a political pamphleteer in the 1700s and 1710s, got into a great deal of trouble with he switched sides politically. Although I did reverence her more than any of human species, referring to what happens at the end of the text, so that you would have me say the thing that was not. Your version had me saying falsehood, lies. Why can he even say lies? Because he is committed to the language in English of the Winhams, those unpronounceable, super-rational equine horse species who don't have a word for lies. So he can't say lie. He only can say the thing that I was not. And you have changed what I wanted to express. Why is this necessary? Because the whole thing is a lie, right? The whole premise of fiction is that this is plausible according to the situation, the deterministic cause and effect world within the novel. This could happen. But Swift here, through the mouthpiece of Gulliver, is making fun of this whole approach, this whole genre. I do want, in the place to complain of my own want of great judgment, you have prevailed upon this on the left side here, or it might be the right side of your screen, to suffer to have my travels published. I didn't even want it to be published. He doesn't want to bring his words to anyone. He's such a misanthrope by the time that he writes this all down after his final voyage is concluded, that he didn't even want to do it. And you, Cousin Simpson, had me do it only for the public good. That the yahoos, the humans, he thinks he's mortified, Gulliver is, that he might be a yahoo. These primitive, atavistic, violent species, of course, they are also enslaved to the Winhams. The Winhams, the horse-like, who sound a lot like humans, that maybe it would help these yahoos that I live among. And so that's why I did it. But it hasn't worked. It hasn't had the moralistic, didactic, improving effect that you suggested it would. It has not put a stop to all corruptions and abuses. And so that's why I would like to take it out of print. But this hasn't happened. You haven't printed the corrected edition. You haven't taken it out of print. You haven't done exactly what I said to put exactly my words into the hands of readers. And I hear, and here it's on the middle column closest to this picture of me, that the manuscript is destroyed. Now this is actually true. There is an account of how Swift did include all kinds of other ulterior sort of cloak and dagger attacks on the political order, surreptitious references to the political elite of his time in his first edition. And that first manuscript really was destroyed, and the revision and some of those most strident attacks were removed for they were thought to be over the line. And I don't have any copy left. That's why that advertisement, which of course is also written by Swift, says this is the actual text. Two other things before we move on. Also lower, just right here, a little lower down the same page, some of the yahoos are taking fault, some of the sailors are taking fault with my use of specific maritime language, but I have since found that sea yahoos act like the land ones to become newfangled in their words. They're always inventing new words, slang. And Swift himself, despite inventing all kinds of neologisms and making fun of neologisms, making fun of new words throughout this text, and it's impossible to read this letter, this preface, without having already read the entire text. How are you supposed to know what yahoos, what Winhams, what Brobdingnags, and he's even saying the correct spelling of Brobdingnags? It's all absurd. These sailors and other humans who make up new words, they can't be trusted anyway. So who are they to correct my language, which is entirely supposed to be absurdly and comically invented? Words can't be trusted. People can't be trusted to use words correctly, except for someone elite, someone brilliant, a genius, like Swift he's implying here. I remember upon each return to mine own country, their old dialect was so altered. Every time the language is being used, he is against that kind of reckless use of language. And if some other yahoos say not only is my language a bit off, but that some have been so bold to think that this is a mere work of invention, that this book is a fiction out of my own brain. And here it's calling attention to it being a fiction. It's coming out of my own brain. Of course, it could be not just the creative work of fiction, but also a work of madness. And have gone so far to drop hint that the Winhams and Yahoos have no more existence than those of Utopia. Of course, Utopia means no place. But here, what the text is doing is saying, sure, you can not trust me. Perhaps I am an unfaithful narrator, in the sense that I'm not telling you exactly what happened. But it's also saying all narrators are unfaithful. It's absurd to think that any narrator is telling you ever what actually happened. And so everything is reduced to a kind of attack on the form itself. Is it a satire of someone trying to read this, trying to elicit some kind of moral? And I am as just a yahoo as any of you. And so we are all kind of debased and an eternal habit of lying, shuffling. It is all an attack on this idea of inauthenticity, of being unfaithful. And the novel, of course, is precisely the form that develops in order to give the authentic account of mankind, of the middle class, of the individual human voice. Okay. He says here also, well, just and the letter to Simpson, I have now done with all such visionary schemes. I'm not seeking to improve anything. We'll see a visionary scheme in a second when we turn to model proposal. This publisher to the reader also tries to, which is of course also written by Swift, attempts to further shore up the veracity, the faithfulness, the fidelity of reliability of Lemuel Gulliver. It goes so far and exaggerates to say that in the town of Redriff, where he retired, there is an air of truth apparent through the whole. Right? It seems very real, very plausible. Same kind of thing that Defoe was going to say about Robinson Crusoe, the so-called publisher will say about Robinson Crusoe. Indeed, the author was so distinguished for his veracity. He was so well known, so famous for being truthful, that it became known in his town of Redriff that when anyone said a thing that sounded that was true, it said, "Oh, it's as true as if Mr. Gulliver said it." That that's the mark of truth, of truthfulness. Okay. Next, so much for satirizing its own form. As for satirizing its period and intellectual pursuit, science, discovery, enlightenment, let's look at chapter 5 of the third section, the third voyage. Chapter 5 is the voyage to the Academy of Legato, this academy in the sky where Laputa rules over its land down below. The academy is the absurd, satirized version of a place of society of an academy, the Royal Academy, which had been established in its time, a kind of a place of discovery, enlightenment, and pure thought, is of course the most absurd place in the world. It is going to waste. They're trying to capture sunbeams. It stinks. It's covered with filth. All of their experiments have absolutely no purpose, since it is entirely divorced from any kind of experience or purpose. There's one very famous and particularly absurd experiment that I want to focus on. It's here, beginning on the middle section, and then with this illustration. It is the computer, the machine of artificial intelligence, which of course is a major discovery of our day, of our generation. One illustrious person, one of the projectors coming up with these ideas, was working on something called the universal artist. He had been 30 years working towards this experiment of improving thought of human life, to sort of systematize and mechanize human thought. This, of course, seems very absurd to Swift, perhaps. And someone were condensing air into a kind of liquid solution that, well, we don't need to go into all the details of how it is. And he says, this is the absurdity of the Gulliver voice. I wasn't possibly smart enough to understand it. It's all about trying to concentrate human understanding. And with this contrivance, okay, here it is. Everyone knew the laborious, and here's the model of it on the side, an illustration of it, that the most ignorant person of reasonable charge with a little bodily labor may write books in philosophy. Even the dumbest person can write. He's mocking the other people, his colleagues, his other innovators of literature, of this form of popular literature, poetry, and different kind of pamphlets. He's all for. So all these different forms, bodies of knowledge, can then be they can be fed into this machine. This is exactly, by the way, how artificial intelligence works. Without inclensions, different language can all come out. And what is produced? The engine can be turned, and it can be broken down. Language can be broken down sentence by sentence into little pieces, in which the whole vocabulary can be brought into this frame and made the strictest computation of the general portion there is in books between the numbers, particles, nouns, and verbs of other parts of speech. Language can be made into a kind of machine that no one speaks, a kind of system. And my question to you, to anyone, is if this was what both artificial intelligence and what we do as linguists as well. And seems like the most marvelous machine to Gulliver. He says, I would do him justice, the sole inventor of this wonderful machine, this form and contrivance of which I desire to leave to delineate upon paper as in the figure here and next. In this school of languages, there was a scheme for entirely the next logical conclusion from that, and it is the next experiment, the next machine, or the next discovery, is a system for entirely abolishing all words whatsoever in order to convey thought without words. Every word we speak is in some degree a diminution of our lungs of corrosion. So why not, for the purpose of efficiency, of enlightenment, to just not speak, to have a kind of communication in which no one needs to speak. This would serve as a universal language, and everything could be written, all of human understanding could be written on something as thin as a wafer. Here is not just satirizing a satire of its own form, but a satire even of language itself. Let's turn now to one further passage in the text of Gulliver's Travels, and then Modest Proposal. The mocking of language is there in the many, many puns and anagrams and word plays in this text, such as you can see here on the slide beneath me, in La Puta, the land where this is taking place, which means the whore, the wench in Spanish, masturbates. I don't think I need to go into too much of that, of what people do with their minds. He's saying what the novel does is masturbate. And Trebinia and Langdon, these lands where he's never really been, but he doesn't want to share too much about his travels there. They're not interesting. Trebinia and Langdon, obvious anagrams for Britain and England, the place where the natives don't really have much. There's not much to say about the natives there. In the latter section, towards the very end of Gulliver's Travels, Gulliver says that he would possibly have imagined retiring to an island with the bare necessities where he could have created his own world and have cogitated on the august, exalted ideas, the virtues of the Wyndhams. This is an attack on Robinson Crusoe, which was actually written before this. It was published in 1719. We're reading it afterwards in order to understand exactly what it was that Defoe was doing. And Defoe, Fielding, Richardson, the more conventional progenitors, developers of the novel, as it did take off, in contrast to Swift, who is taking this new form and saying, let me show you how absurd this is, how absurd it is, what I can do with it, how absurd it is that we're all engaged in it, that we respect it. And that's why I've said it's similar to what Sacha Baron Cohen did with sort of reality TV, with documentary video showing, you think this is real? Let me show you how crazy it is. In this one paragraph, which I hope you've now read, this is the Crusoe narrative, which is taken very seriously, as we'll see in the next few lectures, developing an entire world on this bare bones island and recreating England there. Gulliver says, yeah, but I passed it over. And Swift is saying, if only we had looked at, and this is Seidel writing, if only we had looked at the novel itself as this sort of bare bones place where we can recreate the foundations, the architecture, the basic design of human society based just on an individual, and had decided, nah, I'll just keep going. Get shot in the knee by a native and quit and keep going. And so there's so much for that. He's able to treat the entire Crusoe narrative in just that one paragraph and dismiss it. Modest Proposal, and then we're done. Here it is Dr. Swift writing, Jonathan Swift writing in his own name. It is very, very famous. Gulliver's Travels was a hit right away within weeks of its publication. There are ripoffs and children's versions and adaptations written right away. It was, and people want to know both. They want to do the real side of it. Other people understood this was all a big joke, the way that people do still today understand satire. This Modest Proposal for the public benefit, for the relief of, for presenting children of poor people and their parents in Ireland, the country where Swift lived most of his life and had very conflicted ideas about it. The Modest Proposal is meant to be, nonetheless, an attack on the kind of economic pamphlets of ideas, essays that are trying to propose solutions, logical solutions. Here it's an economic, political solution, And the solution that is offered, here it is right here, and here we can read it in the British Library's first edition of it in 1729. I offer humbly, so I've gotten this idea. Let me just actually go up a little bit. I have an idea from an American. It's interesting this comes from an American. We're associated somehow with like cannibalism, starting from Montaigne, whom I met in London. An American that I met in London gave me this idea that a young, healthy child, well-nourished, is at a year old, the most delicious and nourishing and wholesome food. 1-year-old, delicious. Whether different ways to prepare it, stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled. And no doubt they can make a wonderful fricassee or a ragout, specific recipes from the cookbook of this mad, deranged op-ed columnist, this essayist. And therefore I offer it, I humbly, he says, I modestly offer it to public consideration that of these, and he's done all the computations, he's offered all these figures and statistics in order to distract you, but of course also to point out how crazy all this is. If I just offer you all this data, it'll convince you of the logic and the rationale of how smart this idea is, but it is a completely madcap, murderous, insane, absurd idea, complete satire here of this form. I offer to public consideration that of the 120,000 children, maybe 20,000 can be reserved for breed, and then the rest. And he reserves for free meals. He does his whole computation here, and the rest, the remaining 100,000, may at a year old, at this 1-year-old, when I've heard from the Americans that they make a wonderful dish, that those people can be served to persons of quality. These are the people, of course, that he's really attacking. The people who think, like, what are we to do of these poor Irish children? And serve them to persons of quality throughout the kingdom, throughout the United Kingdom, throughout Britain, and advising the mother to let them suck plentifully in order to plump them up. They'll make 2 dishes at an entertainment table, and when the family dines alone, a simple quarter will suffice to turn these poor children, these sweet street urchins of the extraneous, superfluous Irish poor into food. Now he has and you'll hear this in this BBC podcast that I'm also recommending you listen to, that he doesn't really have any great sympathy or affection for the Irish poor, but his real object of satire, the people he's skewering are his fellow upper class or ruling British, either in Ireland or back on the main island. He then goes on to say this food will be somewhat dear. It'll be quite, and it means that he's punning there. He means it in two. Where is it? He means that in two senses, that the food will both. Yeah, it is. This food will both be it'll be a delicacy. It'll be expensive, of course, also quite dear. It'll be both precious and absurdly sentimental. It'll be very, it's human. It's murder what they're proposing, and it'll be very proper for landlords who have already devoured most of the parents to have the best title to the children. That's his real purpose here. The landlords who are these British landlords and overlords who are impoverishing the Irish peasants, the Irish people. The parents should therefore, of course, why not just have first dibs at the children? And the pun makes it clear that this is his real purpose here. At the end, and a wonderful little coda to it is, if anybody thinks that I'm suggesting this for my own profit, well, I can't make money from this. I can't make money from selling my children for food because, well, as he writes at the end, I have no children by which I can propose to get a single penny. The youngest, being 9 years old, has already outgrown this, and my wife is past childbearing. Ending with the complete straight face, the satire, continuing his canard, the hoax, the public-facing absurdity until the end. The satire is completely immersive, and the joke is on anyone who doesn't fully understand it. But hopefully, the wit drives home and makes clear to the objects of his ridicule precisely how heartless and absurd their search for a kind of solution to poverty without wanting to do anything about it, and really is, in his view. We've seen a few passages now in Gulliver's Travels and in a modest proposal that illustrate how this author takes on his own forms, the forms that he is seeking to both use and sort of, as Seidel says, eats them out, corrodes them, destroys them from within by creating voices that are blind, myopic, deaf, perhaps is a better word, deaf to their own absurdity, to their own hubris, their own pride, to their own ridiculousness, and shows very rationally how irrational the Enlightenment mind and the literary ambition truly is.